Hey sports fans, Coach Nick here and welcome to B-Ball Breakdown. Today I'm happy to have Dan McCarney, who is the Spurs blogger for the San Antonio Express News at SpursNation.com. Dan, are you ready to talk some Spurs basketball?
Absolutely.
Well, let's break right into it because I think everyone's concerned about injuries even after they do all that to protect their players. What's the latest that we hear about Tony Parker's back?
Well, they're listing him as day-to-day now, and they got a huge win last night, survived another big injury scare. Duncan's knee buckled in the first quarter, and you're thinking, for about 5 minutes, you don't know how serious that is, and he comes waltzing back to the court, and all he does is put up a 2015, 2 weeks away from his 38th birthday. So they seems like they've dodged a bullet there, but that was a huge victory because it basically puts them one victory of theirs or one loss of Oklahoma City away from clinching home court throughout. They basically got it already against everybody but the Thunder. So I think they can afford to maybe be a little bit patient with Tony's injury. They've got the Lakers in the last game. No offense, Laker fans, but I think they can probably, that's kind of a gimme probably. So maybe they can afford to maybe keep Tony out for another week. We'll have a better idea tonight before the Suns game talking to Popovich. But from what I understand, with injuries, anything with the back can be really tricky, and it sounds like that thing can take up to about 2 weeks to heal. And the big concern with Parker is it's just been one thing after the other this season. He's had about 5 or 6 different injuries. They thought he had a hernia at one point, and he's played basically 3 years straight, nonstop, without a break, and it seems like it's finally taking a toll on his body.
Well, who are we going to play? Who are the Spurs going to play in the playoffs in the first round? We got 4 teams bunched up within 2 games of each other, going from the Warriors to the Suns to the Mavericks to the Grizzlies. Any of those teams could kind of make it. Let's just say that you're number 1 because I think the Spurs are clearly going to get that number 1 seed. So who do we think is going to end up being that 8th seed and play them in the first round?
Kind of looking at the Suns. I don't have the standings in front of me, but it seemed like I think Dallas only has a couple games left, so they should be safe in that 7th spot. And that's kind of out of those 3. I kind of put the Warriors. I did a breakdown a couple days ago, and I put the Warriors off to the side. I just didn't think they'd fall that far. But of those 3 teams, I think the Suns are actually the toughest. They've dominated Dallas and Memphis in the last couple years. Everybody seems to think Memphis is a tough matchup for them because they remember 11, but the Spurs have just totally dominated since that series. The Suns, I don't think they'll take them more than 5 games, but they're very young, and they came in for preseason, and you could tell pretty early that they have a unique chemistry. They've got a bunch of young guys, and it just seems like they fit really well together. Goran Dragic, he's had some great success against the Spurs in the past in the playoffs, and he's having a spectacular year. You had Eric Bledsoe, he's now healthy, back to the mix. They just really run, and the Spurs, if they've had a problem this year, it seems like it's been against kind of those younger, more athletic type teams. So I still wouldn't expect the series to go more than 5 games, but that's the tougher matchup of those teams, I think.
I agree. I know it's funny. I think that Dragic is almost a clone of Tony Parker. And I think he will ultimately get to that level of top 3 point guard because he plays, it's so much faster, just like Tony Parker used to. I hate to say it, even though every once in a while he clocks up there again. But definitely, if Tony Parker or Tim Duncan goes down, is that it? Do they have any hope of getting to the NBA Finals?
I mean, they've had really good success without Tony this year. I think they're like 11-3 without him. So, and this is a team more than any other that relies on system over relying on 1 or 2 guys. And that's been a concerted effort by them as their guys, Duncan, Ginobili, Parker have gotten older. They've done a really good job kind of keeping their team, I don't know if fresh is the right word, but just really getting to a point where we're not relying on 1 or 2 guys. But if you're going to single out anybody, those are kind of the 2. I just have a hard time seeing them winning a title without Parker and especially Duncan, just because he's a big guy and they don't have a lot of depth in that spot without those 2 guys playing key roles. So it would be a really tough order.
What is Pop and the team saying about the notion of getting swept by OKC and seemingly not having their number if they have to face them? Is that a concern for them, the regular season results, based on what might happen in the playoffs?
Yeah, to me, it's not so much this regular season, but you just stretch it back to that Western Conference Finals 2 years ago where they're down 2-0, and all of a sudden they just figured the Spurs out. Granted, they won a couple close games, kind of coin flip type games, but they've won, I think, 10 of the last 12 meetings, and they just really seem to have, so much of basketball is predicated on matchups. Kind of rock, paper, scissors, this team beats that beats that team. And the Thunder just seem to have the personnel with their length and athleticism that really comes. The Spurs offense is predicated so much on ball movement and player movement and precision, and the Thunder just seem to do a really good job gumming them up. I think in this series this year, they're giving up only about 99 points per 100 possessions against the Spurs, which is fantastic. So Popovich was almost kind of defiant. He's not an excuse guy by any means, but the last game got brought up, and he kind of went out of his way to point out, well, it was the back end of a back-to-back, and they had 3 days rest. He never does that, but he kind of made a point to go through those details and really said almost kind of, Papa is usually a 9 out of 10 on the sarcasm meter, and I think he went up to 11 on this one. Basically, I think we can play them better. But Ginobili, speaking to him after their last home game, he did say, yeah, I mean, the fact that they seem like they've figured us out is a problem, and we're going to have to look at video and figure that out. So they're definitely aware that the Thunder have played well against them lately.
Well, lastly, is there any difference in their approach this year over last year or years before? Have you noticed anything tangible, or is it just sort of, get that lunch pail on and just keep working as hard as they've always done?
Well, that's always the identity, but Brett Brown, when he was in town a couple weeks ago, he made some interesting observations in that, he was a guy that had a big role. I mean, as a coach, and you're on Twitter a lot, just talking about how they play such a beautiful brand of basketball, and it's such an identity change from maybe 10, 12 years ago when they were really low post, pounded in, defensive oriented. And Brown was there through that whole duration of how they've kind of developed as an offense, and he had some fascinating thoughts about it. Going from that low post with Duncan and David, then kind of opening things up to let Manu, when he was in his prime at about 05, 06, to really get creative. Then as Parker started to develop, they got really pick and roll heavy. And from Brown's perspective this year, they've kind of scaled back from that. They still run a lot of pick and roll, but it's a lot more, even more motion offense oriented than they've been in the past. And Parker had a run last year of about 40 or 50 straight games in double figures. He was just a monster. And this year they just haven't had that consistency out of him. And it's remarkable because you take a guy like that out of the mix and most teams would suffer. Well, here they are. If they win 2 more games, they're going to tie the franchise record for victories. So it's a really remarkable achievement. And I just have a lot of respect for Popovich as a coach, and that he's so flexible in his approach. So many coaches are, this is the way I play, and we're going to do it this way, and they don't really have the capability. Other than Pat Riley going from Showtime to that kind of smash mouth ball in the 90s with the Knicks, I don't know of too many coaches that have gone through such a drastic philosophy change. So I just have a lot of admiration for the way he just deals with everything, and it's been another remarkable season, and if they hold up, they're going to have a great chance to win another title.
Absolutely. Well, I agree. I think that they're not going to have as much trouble. It'll be a good series between them and the Thunder, but it's not going to be any kind of 4-game sweep like it appears in the regular season. So we should. I've been looking forward to that matchup. It's going to be a great one. I think the playoffs are going to be amazing. So everybody. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
The last two, the second round on in the West just looks fantastic. Last year OKC was without Westbrook. The Clippers were banged up, so we have to be fair and say that the Spurs got a pretty fortuitous road to the finals last year. But, I mean, this year, those second-round matchups on, if it advances to that point, you've got Spurs, Thunder, Clippers, which in a lot of the advanced stats, they're actually kind of favored to win the title, or at least get to the finals. And then you add Houston into the mix, which has also had a lot of success against the Spurs. Just some really, really great matchups on paper that we're kind of keeping our fingers crossed so we get to see.
Absolutely. Well, everybody, make sure that you follow Dan on Twitter for all the latest Spurs news. It's a great account to follow. Dan, thanks for coming on the show. And don't forget, at B-Ball Breakdown, we're not a channel, we're a conversation. You in? Are you in, Dan?
Always in. Always really admire your stuff, and that's a must follow for me. So,
thanks. We'll catch up to you during the playoffs.